Alright, we're going to start here with my Mortal Kombat collection here, the world famous one. You can see here I have a few box games for Genesis, 32X, Sega CD, Saturn, the PlayStation long box version. A couple of loose games here. This is Mortal Kombat 1 for the Sega Master System, which is basically the Game Gear version. A couple of Super Nintendo here. You might notice this one looks a little different. That is the Super Famicom version of Mortal Kombat 2, which is noticed for having the blood green and everything being black and white when you do a fatality. We've got a couple of portable versions here. We have the Game Gear Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 1, and then we have the Game Boy versions, which the first one's actually bad, but then 2, 3, and 4 actually aren't too bad for Game Boy. You might notice here Mortal Kombat 4 here is a Game Boy Color game, which makes it a little bit better, but portable games are not too bad. Got a couple of loose games here for Game Boy Advance. We have the couple of the Midway Treasure series here, and the more recent games, and then we have the art book that came with the Mortal Kombat 9, and then the DVD, the movie, of course. And you can see the bookends here. And in addition to that, I also have my 3DS here, the extra thumbstick, which if you have big hands, that's actually pretty nice. The 3DS itself here, I have my PSP, and this in here, I can unzip it, is my DS that I actually got in the Nintendo store in New York. It's the Mario branded kind. It's pretty neat. And this is one of my first little neat pickups. I was at one of those used CD stores and I found a Game Boy Advance. I got it for like 20 bucks. It's the NES version, which is nice. It didn't have a AC adapter, which was fine because I had quite a few spares, and got it for pretty good price. These go on eBay for like, I've seen them go for like $50 to $100. It's a little scuffed up, but not too bad. This is another neat thing that I just recently found. This is a Mattel electronic baseball game. Notice it's a little scuffed up, and the reason why is because this is actually the original one I had when I was growing up. This is about 34 years old, so all things considered, it's not in too bad a shape. Still works fine. I just put new batteries in it not too long ago, and works like a champ. And down here, under the table here, we have my actual game collection. First shelf here, we've got some loose 2600 games. I have the manual. If I can pull this out a little bit, you can see what's in here. And the second drawer down here, we have more 2600 games. I actually have my Game Genie for my NES. I have the code books for it. And back in the day, you could actually subscribe and get more codes for the Game Genie. Let me move this out of the way. You can see the rest of the games here. Down here at the bottom, we have my Super Nintendo games. I have my extra Wii controller with the Super Game Boy. You can play Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo. I have a couple of Sega power supplies. This is neat here. This little card set. This is a Japanese Club Nintendo exclusive. Some people know that Nintendo actually started as a card company back in the 1800s, and this is a deck of cards. I believe the game is called Hanfuda. Obviously, I'm not a Japanese speaker, but it's a Japanese card game that how Nintendo got started, and they made a Mario-themed card set. Not really sure how the game's played, but it's a neat little thing to have. So you have here the Super Nintendo games. Got a few Super Famicom games in here. The Fire Pro Wrestling series, which if you're into wrestling games is a good one to have. This one's actually pretty neat. This is the original John Madden football. And it's not really much of a game, but it's kind of for historical purposes, the one that started the craze. Slide this back in here. And over here on this side, we've got the Atari 7800 games. And this neat little adapter here, this actually goes into a Game Gear, lets you play Sega Master System games, because the Game Gear is basically just a portable Master System, so that's neat. Got the power supply for my Lynx, and just a few extra, I think just for my PSP. Next door down here is a little bit of a mismatch. We have mostly Sega games, a couple of Master System games. I actually have my loose 32X games over here as well. The Wii Classic controller. I also have my Lynx games, a couple of Game Boy Advance games here. PSP. See, there's the Wii Classic controller here. The loose games. And on the bottom here, this is the Intellivision games. This is the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Couple of games for that. This is the link cable for the GameCube to use the Game Boy Advance for as like an extra controller. Another PSP power cord here. This is the Game Boy Advance. And under this is the Game Gear. And, Avalanche. And the Atari Lynx itself, which actually is a pretty decent system. You know, color systems back in the day, they took like a buttload of batteries, so they weren't really as portable as a Game Boy. It just didn't have the staying power color screens. Just were a little too bit of a memory hog at the time. But here we have some Game Gear games, some loose, some in the case. And finally, do this one-handed again here. Apologize for the nausea-inducing camera work here. You have my original Game Boy games, and underneath that I actually have the original Game Boy, back the one that I had when I was a kid. Still works. Still have to, you know, just other than replacing the batteries, everything still works fine. And if some of you have seen this already in a video I did before, my Neo Geo CD that I just got recently. So that's going to conclude part 1 here, and we will be back here in a moment going over the systems, and we'll complete the little grand tour of my collection. Alright, we're back here with part 2. This is actually all my systems here. Let me back up a little bit and kind of get the whole thing in frame. Go over this shelf by shelf here. Over here we have my 2600. We have the Atari Flashback, which is a 7800 clone with games program built in. It's actually not bad. It's kind of like a mini version of the real system. What's neat is it actually uses the actual controller ports are the same as the actual system, so you can use the real Atari controllers if you have them. And from here we have the original Intellivision at the bottom. Let me lift this up a little bit. If you can see in there on television, dig that 70s wood grain there. And over here we have one of my personal favorites, 7800. Let me pull this down here a little bit so you can see it. 7800. Also plays 2600 games, which is nice. Now the default controllers, which look like this, are kind of hard to use, but I was managed to pick up a gamepad. This is actually what was released in Europe. These little Nintendo style Atari controllers, which are a lot easier to use with the system. Down here we have the Flashback 2, which as you can see it looks like a 2600. Again, it uses the same controller, so if you have the original ones you can use those too. Although these ones are actually pretty good for, you know, something that comes with a $20 system. Down here we have the Super Nintendo with the Game Genie plugged in, and you may notice that that is actually a Super Famicom game plugged into it, which is a neat little pro tip. If you have a Game Genie, there's little plastic tabs that you can file off with relative ease, and that will allow you to play the Super Famicom games on your Super Nintendo system. It works pretty well. Over here we have the GameCube that actually has the Game Boy player on the bottom to play Game Boy Advance and Game Boy games on your TV, which is neat. Well, it's a little weird playing Game Boy games with the GameCube controller because it's way more buttons than you're used to. But other than that, it's pretty good. Down here we have the Dreamcast, which pretty much speaks for itself. You really wouldn't need to know much more about that. I mean, basically it's the Dreamcast. It's a pretty awesome system that unfortunately came toward the end of Sega's life as a hardware manufacturer, so it really didn't get the love it should have, but there's still games being made for it today. Gunlord just come out recently for it, which is a really awesome shooter game. Up here, underneath my GameCube controllers, we have the Intellivision 2, which is obviously the second model, and all the games work for it. The one plus here is these controllers actually are removable, which they are not on the original. Up here they are down here, so unlike the first one, if the controllers break you can actually replace them. On the original, if the controllers break, you're pretty much boned. But other than that, it's pretty much the same system. It has more of an 80s style design, doesn't have the 70s wood grain to it anymore, which some people, you know, prefer, some people don't prefer. I'm a big fan of the retro systems with wood grain. You can't really beat that. So down here is where I have a bunch of things stacked up. So going from top to bottom, this is my PS2 that I actually took the front cover off of here because you can get a, do I have it right here? Yes. Little tool here that you can use to play import games. Basically you pry the disc open and let it load the Japanese game, which is a quick and easy way to play import games on your PS2. Above that we've got my Sega Saturn. Let me move some of the stuff out of the way here. Sega Saturn here has the Pro Action Replay card in the back, which serves two purposes. One, it's extra memory for the games that need it, and two, it also lets you play import games easily without having to mod anything. And we have a couple of PlayStation 1s. I actually got this one in a flea market with all the cords for like 10 bucks. The disc tray, the open button sticks a little bit on it, but hey, you know, 10 bucks. And I got a PS1 recently, just in case that other one decides to stop functioning permanently at some point. I always want to have it back up just in case. Of course, here we have random Nintendo controllers, and here we have the NES, which is actually the system that I played growing up as a kid. Still the original, still works fine, and as is the Nintendo 64, which is also the one that I had growing up with the NES dog bone controller on the top. We move this out of the way. I got a little adapter on here because, as you may be able to tell, that is a import Nintendo 64 game. Again, it'll play. It's just a matter of the cartridge design is a little bit different, but nothing a converter can't fix. If you can't find one of those converters, I heard that a Game Genie will do the trick. Down here on the next shelf we have my Frankenbeast of a Sega system. This is my original Sega Genesis and Sega CD. I actually did buy one. I'm one of the ones that actually bought it when it came out. And I recently obtained the 32X on top of it. So here we have what I call the Voltron of game systems here. The 32X, in my experience, isn't as bad as people say it is. I mean, the idea, of course, is frankly ridiculous, but the games themselves aren't too bad. You know, Mortal Kombat 2 is good on it. Virtua Fighter is good on it. Doom is good as any other home version of the time. So it's just, I think it's more the idea of having all these attachments on top of the Genesis being ridiculous has actually kind of hurt the reputation of the games themselves that aren't too bad. And over here we have my top-loading NES, which is a nice thing to find if you can grab one. It has obviously loads at the top, and that means that You're going to have less problems with games not playing. You're not going to worry about contacts being bent. All the downsides to the original Nintendo don't really happen on this too well. It's hard to find because it only was made for about a year, I think, but if you can grab one and it's not too expensive, it's definitely worth picking up. Now below this is one of my holy grails that I've been trying to find for a while. I have a original Famicom with the disc system, which comes with this neat little protector card so that we don't have a game in. Put this in to protect the system itself here. Now those of us that are familiar with the 5 1/4 and a 3 1/2 floppy drives back in the day, it's a pretty similar concept. The discs are a little bit of a proprietary size. The reason why it didn't catch on in the US is because, well, battery backups became prevalent, but also too easy to copy these games. But it's a neat system. I was lucky to get one from somebody who had recently replaced the belt, which you're going to have to do at some point if you get one of these. It's kind of a tricky process, but all in all, it's not too bad of a find if you can grab one. And of course, everybody knows the Famicom, the Japanese Nintendo. This right here is the adapter that you plug in to use the disc system. But actually, if you have a Famicom NES converter that you can find in a lot of old Nintendo games, you can actually play the disc system on the top loader. I found that out. It was pretty neat. And the next one over here is we have my Wii, and this here is a USB hard drive. I modified the Wii to be able to play games off of USB. It's a 500 gig hard drive. There's about 160 games on there. It's a lot easier than having to swap the discs back and forth. Makes things a lot easier. I don't have to worry about running back and forth. Because the Wii mine never has this problem, but it has had issues. It's been noted for having issues reading discs, especially dual layer discs over time. So you rip them all to a hard drive, you don't have to keep putting the laser through a lot of abuse. And down here on the bottom shelf is my newest edition here, my 5200. I kind of have the backup to get this beast in full frame. This system here, kind of another one has a bad rap. It's kind of like the 32X. It's not as bad as people thought. The controllers are not that great, but the games are pretty good. It's a light year step up from this 2600. And there's actually good, like a playable version of Pac-Man, the first time on an Atari system. It's a neat thing to have as well. And over here is my stack of NES games and also some Famicom games on the corner here, which are a neat thing to have. You look at a Famicom game, it kind of makes you realize how boring NES games are. They're all in different colors. Some of them are different cartridge sizes, different heights and all that. And we just had the same plain, boring gray cartridges for every game. I mean, there was a few, Zelda was gold and all that, but for the most part, it's hundreds of boring gray cartridges. But at least it's something different to look at. So that's going to conclude this part here, and we're going to jump all over to the next section of the room here and look at some of my box games, and that'll complete the tour. Alright, so over here we're going to looking at the games that are boxed. This is the Wii games. This is like Wii Sports and things that come with things section over here. But these are all the box games that I have. Down here, this goes into Xbox 360 games. And then we have a few original Xbox games that are playable on the 360 as well. And down here, we have PlayStation 2 games. And we have a few loose N64 games, as well as my boxed N64, the two Japanese games I have in box on the end here. And then we're going to slide over to the other shelf here. We have a couple of boxed Atari games. These are Atari 2600. You can hear my son in the background, I'm sure. This is 7800. Some links. And some television games here that go into the Sega Saturn. And we moved on here, and we have the Sega CD games in box. Also, too, stuff to notice too, you might have seen NBA Jam come in here quite a few times. It's amazing how many versions of NBA Jam were released for different systems. And they're good games, but my goodness, there's tons of them. And here we have the GameCube section. You can tell I was kind of in a sports phase at this point in my life, but they're all still good games. Now, Capcom versus SNK, that's a good fighting game if you're into one that's kind of different than the usual, you know, Marvel versus Capcom type. It's the same style, just, you know, characters you're not haven't seen 100 times in different versions. And down here, got a few more PlayStation games. This is my boxed 32X games. I actually have a Master System game in here as well. A couple of Game Boy Advance boxes, some DS. And this is hard to see, but it's PlayStation 1 and a few Dreamcast games on the end here, capping off with PSP. Now up top here, we have the Super Mario All-Stars. We got some Nintendo powers here. The plug-and-play Mortal Kombat. Classic controller for the Wii that looks like a Super Famicom controller, which is another Japanese Club Nintendo exclusive. And we have the Kirby 20th Anniversary Collection, which is a nice little collection of games. It actually has not just the NES games, it has the Game Boy games, Nintendo 64 games are all on here, which is pretty neat. And underneath this plug-and-play I have a fight stick for the Xbox 360. And over here we have my Mortal Kombat fight stick that came with, well, it came with the deluxe version of Mortal Kombat 9, but I actually got this basically free from Amazon. I sold my old iPhone for way more than I thought I would. I got about $110 for it, and I used that to buy this off of Amazon for $100. So it's a pretty nice thing to have. For those that don't know, it actually has the working arcade parts inside. So this is pretty much exactly what you would find in a Mortal Kombat arcade unit back in the day, or at least a modern version thereof. So that's going to pretty much sum up the collection here. I'll get this all put together and uploaded for you, and hopefully enjoy what you see.